All right. So have you ever thought, why are people investing in self-storage? Well, if you have, you're like most real estate investors. You know what? Before I get started, I need to check that this is actually recording. So let me check that this is recording before I get too far into this. Okay. Perfect. I believe it is. Okay. All right. Awesome. If you are in the comments, if you guys are here, if you could just let me know that you're here and that you can hear me, that would be great. That way I can go ahead and get started. Also, let me know where you're coming in from. I'd love to hear where you guys are coming in from. But let's go ahead and get started. So my question earlier was, have you ever asked yourself, like, why are people investing in self-storage, right? What is the big deal about self-storage? I mean, if you have, you're basically like most real estate investors. Specifically, just wanted to know, like, why, right? A lot of multifamily investors, like, why would you invest in self-storage? Like, what's the big deal? Well, I mean, today, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to discuss that exact topic. Why invest in self-storage? So, I myself, my name is Powell. I live in Los Angeles. I have a multifamily background. I came from the multifamily background, but when COVID occurred back in March 2020, I really decided to add a different asset class to my mix of investments, and that one was self-storage. So since then, closed on my very first property in January 2021, and now my group, we're up to 8 properties. That's a total of 2,000 units. It's like 250,000 square feet. All of my properties are in outside of California, and yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we get started with the topic of today, which is why invest in self-storage, if you have a chance, I'd love for you to give me a like or hit a subscribe, and let me know what other topics you'd be interested in hearing about. All right. And if you are actually interested in partnering with me, then fill out the link in the description below, and love to hear from you. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with why invest in self-storage. All right. So let's talk about the overview of the self-storage industry. I think this gives a little context of it, just for basis, to start off with. Well, self-storage is a relatively new asset class compared to a lot of other commercial real estate, right? It was kind of created around like 1970-ish, right? Those are the oldest buildings have been around since, say, 1970. But I mean, when you compare it to hotels, apartment buildings, residential real estate, retail, all those things have been around for like hundreds of years. So self-storage is one of the very newest one of the newest commercial real estate asset classes. And even though it's one of the newest, and it's kind of a niche market, it's actually fairly popular in terms of like how many are there, right? There's like 60,000 self-storage facilities in America. And you think of 60,000, okay, what does that mean? Well, if you take Starbucks, you take McDonald's, you take KFC, you take Wendy's and Walmart, and there's more self-storage facilities than all of those. And if you combine them, there's still more self-storage facilities than all of those other big brands combined. So more than Starbucks, McDonald's, KFC, Wendy's, and Walmart. All of those facilities, all those locations combined, there's still more self-storage facilities in America, which most people don't think about. And that's just kind of talking about how well accepted this industry is, right? Now, when we talk about, another thing to talk about is really kind of like 70% of the owners are mom and pop, right? And what do we mean by mom and pop? It means they're not institutional. They're not institutional grade. They're not owned by a big REIT. They're not sort of a large regional owner, right? It's basically, mom and pop basically describes people that own like one or two facilities, right? And it's 70% of the owners of self-storage facilities are mom and pop, which means that, and it just to, I guess, compare that with say multifamily. Multifamily, when you start getting into, I'd say, apartments that are probably 100 units and more, that ratio of mom and pop owners that are 100 units and more is very slim. It's probably like 10 to probably something like 10% at the most. I don't know. But it's more like 90% of owners of multifamily that have 100 units or more are institutional grade, right? And so when you're talking about the industry, that means there's a lot of opportunity to work with mom and pop type of owners. There's a lot of ways to improve the facilities. And so that's one of the attractions to self-storage. It's not although it is consolidating as an asset class, it has not consolidated as far as many other asset classes like hotels, right? They just there hasn't been that level of consolidation, although it's moving that way. So let's see. How about, another reason why to invest in self-storage is really this. It's the recession performance, okay? People always want to know, like, how did self-storage perform during the recessions, okay? So when we talk about 2008 being the Great Recession, self-storage outperformed all other real estate asset classes during that time. And that was pretty eye-opening for a lot of people, right? And there's a number of different factors, right? Maybe the supply was really low. It actually does well in times of like when things are changing, like when there's divorce or when people have to move around or people, die, things like that. All these things kind of contribute to self-storage being an asset class that people need to use. And all those things happen just as much during a downturn as they do during an upturn, right? So self-storage did really well during that time, better than multifamily, better than retail, better than hotels, better than every other asset class in commercial real estate. I heard a stat. Now, I don't know if this is actually true or not, but I heard a stat that said it did the best in any other asset class besides alcohol. Alcohol might be the only one. Now, I don't know. I don't know where that stat came from, but I don't know. I think it's a funny stat to hear about. But that said, that was really eye-opening for people that it did so well during the Great Recession, right? And then so we fast forward to just a couple of years ago. It's like, how did self-storage do during COVID? And the truth is, like, if you look at the national rent growths, the national rent growth for self-storage was up in the 12%, which is very high, very high. I mean, 12% during 2020 and 2021. I mean, that's pretty high for your rent growth to happen when a lot of America is getting shut down and a lot of things are happening in chaos, all over the place, and people don't know. People are very uncertain about the job situation, about work from home, but a lot of that work from home really pushed self-storage because since so many people were moving back home and working from home, well, they needed more space. So they needed to move that dresser and that extra bed and extra couch somewhere, and that somewhere became self-storage. And the trends look like that's going to still stay because the work from home is not just going to all of a sudden stop and everybody's going to go back to their locations. There's going to be some type of hybrid, or there's going to be some, there's going to be this mixture. But that acceleration of working from home has, propelled self-storage rent growth throughout this whole time. So it performed extremely well during the recession, the Great Recession, as well as performing well during COVID. I mean, just like every other asset class, it also performed very well while there was a significant upturn in the market in between those years. So those are some of the things that people look at, and especially with kind of the unsettling feeling that people are having right now and nowadays with what's going on in the economy. It's a lot of people are looking towards, hey, what's an asset class that people can feel a little more secure in? And that happens to be, for a lot of people, self-storage, right? And because people are turning away from a lot of the markets, whether that's stocks, bonds, cash, other different types of real estate, it's just It's just kind of where people are moving towards. So let's also talk about what are some other reasons why people invest in self-storage. Okay. So another reason that people invest in self-storage are the tax advantages. And just like other commercial real estate or even residential real estate, there are a significant amount of tax advantages for self-storage. Now, when I first started researching self-storage and started thinking about it as far as how it compared to multifamily, those of you who know multifamily know that you're going to probably want to do a cost segregation study, right? You're going to want to do something like that to accelerate your tax benefits in year one. So when you do that, you're basically reclassifying different components of your real estate. And those different components are like your windows, your electrical wiring, your anything that's bolted down, so your water heaters or those types of appliances, your flooring, doors, all different types of things like that. The more that you can reclassify, the more that you can accelerate them into year one bonus depreciation, which we have currently. It'll be tapering off starting 2023, but basically with all that accelerated depreciation, the more that you can reclassify, the higher percentage that you can reclassify in your asset, the more write-off you're going to get earlier on. All right. And so when just thinking about it, I was thinking, okay, well, let's talk about self-storage versus multifamily. Multifamily has all those things, has windows, has all this electrical, has a lot of plumbing issues, toilets, bathrooms, cabinets, appliances, flooring, all those different things, right? And so you're going to be able to accelerate those at a different rate and bring them into year one. When you look at self-storage, well, self-storage doesn't really have that, right? It doesn't really have all those different components. It really has doors, and then it has, a building, right? It's a building and with a bunch of doors. And so, just kind of off the top of my head, I was thinking, well, it's probably not so good for tax benefits. Probably not going to be able to write off as much depreciation as you would in multifamily. Then I started talking to a lot of people that do the cost segregation study. So talking to them about, okay, well, when you do a cost segregation study, like how much are we going to be able to reclassify? And that number was very, very surprising. I should have just downloaded this graphic. So there's a graphic out there that just listed all these different asset classes. And there's probably, 15 different asset classes that they do cost segregation studies on. Well, the two that I am the most familiar with are multifamily and self-storage. And multifamily, the average reclassification, it says between 15 to 40%. So 15 to 40% of your property could be reclassified, which also means it could be pushed into year one for your bonus depreciation. So I thought that was pretty high. I thought that was pretty good. It sounded like exactly what I had experienced with multifamily. So then I look at self-storage and I figure it's going to be lower than 15 to 40%. Well, it's actually listed at 30 to 70%. So 30 to 70% of your property can be reclassified. And I checked in with other cost segregation study teams and asked them the same. I said, Kim, is that about right? That range, 30 to 70% can be reclassified in self-storage? And the answer was yes. And so I was pretty surprised. And then actually, when we got our first properties, we started doing our cost segregation studies. And yeah, we're in that range or even higher. So we felt really good. We felt like, hey, that's awesome. I think our lowest ones was like in the 40%. So we're like at 40%, and we're upwards of that 70%. So even higher on some of our properties. And if I don't know, we can get into like reasons why and things like that. But that is just like an illustration of the tax benefits. If you know about the tax benefits and the depreciation that you can get from owning real estate, and why people want to own real estate because of this depreciation, and how it can help you on your taxes, well, it just happens to be that self-storage can even do one of the best jobs in terms of giving you the amount of depreciation that you can get compared to even other asset classes within real estate. So So I was wrong when I initially thought of it, but I am pleasantly surprised with that as a self-storage investor. All right, so let's get into some other reasons here. Another reason that why you would invest in self-storage is really the value add piece of it, right? There's a significant amount of things that you can do on a self-storage facility to improve your net operating income, or improve your income, or cut your expenses down, right? Now, I mean, some of these things are tenant insurance, right? You can require tenant insurance. There's expansion possibilities. There's selling retail items. There's parking, adding parking there, or different types of vehicles, U-Haul or truck rental services, notaries or PO boxes that you can add, cell towers because you got space and you don't have that many people there that are maybe don't want a cell tower right next to them. Billboards, the same type of thing. You're potentially on a busy street and you have space, and people don't really, you don't have a lot of people at your facility, so they don't really care if there's a billboard there. There's other ways to make money. So I mean, there's a ton of different ways to make money, and really, because self-storage is a business, right? It's a business that gets the advantages of those tax benefits that we talked about. So there's a number of different things to add value, to have this value add component with self-storage. So that is a big reason why people invest in self-storage. Okay, and the more that you understand those, the more that you can employ a lot of those different tactics. And not every facility is going to employ all of them, but you can be creative and you can act as just like a business owner and try to figure out different ways that you can bring in more income or cut your expenses down. All right. Okay, let's talk about another reason why people invest in self-storage. And this is really what the expense ratio. Now, this happens to be because we're comparing it to, say, multifamily, right? And because, I mean, I know these two asset classes the best for me, so that's why it's easy for me to compare them and talk to people about them. I figure a lot of people out here are probably comfortable with multifamily as well, so you understand these kind of comparisons. But let's talk about expense ratio. Now, just kind of a general rule of thumb, it's not going to be the case for everywhere. It's not the case for every single property, but as a general rule of thumb, when you get into sort of the larger apartment buildings, 50, 100 units or more, you're looking at somewhere like a 50% expense ratio, right? Might even be a little higher, maybe 55, but somewhere around 50% expense ratio is kind of a general rule of thumb. You might be a little bit higher, you might be able to get a little bit lower, but that's a good place to start out with, just thinking about, okay, when you're trying to estimate what are my expenses going to be at this property. All right. And that ratio is basically you take your income and you take your expenses, assuming your income that you are stabilized, right? If you're not stabilized, well, it's probably going to be a lot higher, but assuming you are a stabilized income, then you look at your expenses, and your expenses would be about 50%. So how about in self-storage? In self-storage, that expense ratio, say when you are stabilized and now you take your expenses compared to your income, your ratio is 40%, right? A rule of thumb, right? Now it's not everywhere and it's not every single time, but a good rule of thumb is 40%. So that means there's 10% of extra margin there that a stabilized self-storage facility would have an advantage over, say, a multifamily property. Now, again, just talking generalities here, not talking about every single case, but in self-storage, you can start out with that 40% expense ratio. There are times, and it's actually fairly common for people that are stabilized, that you can get significantly lower than 40% as well. You can be in the low 30s. I mean, I've even heard of places that are, if when you have a high rent and you're like you're running at a really nice facility, and you're running it really well, you can get even into the high 20s, right? So, I mean, that isn't what everybody will be able to get to, but it is very common for people to get into, say, 35 or even a little bit lower, 30 to 35% expense ratio. So that's a healthy margin there. That if 35% of your income is going towards your expenses, that doesn't include your debt, right? So that does not include your debt, right? So don't think about it as including your debt. But besides the debt, If it's just 35%, then you have your debt, and then you have all the rest can be, profit. That's pretty good. It's a pretty good margin. So I think that people are pleasantly surprised with that. And why? Let's talk about why. Why is your expense ratio lower in, say, self-storage than it is in multifamily? Okay. Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons why is your turn costs are lower. Right. When you think about like how what you have to do to turn a unit when somebody leaves in multifamily, all the things that you need to do time-wise as well as expenses-wise and pay for those things, that cost is pretty significant. And as an owner that's one of your highest costs is turn costs. Well, in self-storage, you don't really have those turn costs. On just a normal turn, somebody leaves, well, what do you do to get it ready for the next renter? You basically have your person go in there and sweep it out, right? They just sweep it out and put a new lock on there. That's it. And that can be done in 15 minutes. So, and it's ready to be rented. So that's pretty I guess a clear look at why self-storage expenses in turn costs are lower than say multifamily, and which helps bring your expense ratio down to say 40% versus 50. I'll give you another example too. In multifamily, one of your biggest expenses is your utility costs, right? So you have electrical, you might have gas. If you got you got water, you got boilers. I don't know. You might or not have that stuff, or you might have that stuff. But you got those things. They can be really expensive. Now, obviously, you guys are owners and you're sophisticated enough, and if you can do it, you can probably institute a RUBS program to alleviate a lot of those costs. Maybe you alleviate 100% of those costs. Maybe you'll just alleviate a portion of those costs. But your utility costs are expensive in multifamily, right? Those are big bills that you have to pay every single month. Well, in self-storage, what are your utility costs? What are they? You do have electrical, right? Because you do have to have lights and cameras and things like that. But how about water? Water can be very, very low, right? You have a person in the office, or maybe you don't have a person in the office, then you don't really have a need for water, right? Or you have a very minimal need for water, right? So you might pay the water bill. It might be very, very low. Gas, I don't know. I don't know of many places that have gas at a self-storage facility. So, and boilers and things like that, you don't really have all that, right? So you don't have to worry about those big costs. Now, electrical, sure, you'll have to pay some. And if you have a climate controlled facility, well, you're going to have your electrical bills are going to be higher, right? You can look into doing some types of solar, or see if there's any way to reduce your electrical usage, like LED lights and other types of equipment like that. But that's just a sense of saying like it's still a lot lower than it is in a multifamily property. Right? Okay. All right. That's enough about expense ratios. Hey, you guys who are here, I do really appreciate you guys being here, and definitely I don't want to make this just me just talking the whole time and you guys not interacting. So if you do have a question, well, first of all, like let me know where you're watching this from, right? I live in LA, but let me know where you're watching this from. I'd love to see where people are checking in from. A lot of times I get people on the East Coast and in the South as well. But also write in some questions, because I'm going to take some Q&A here at the end, and I'm getting towards the end. We don't got much more to cover here about like why self-storage. So I'd love to hear what your questions are, and let me know, and we're happy to answer them. Okay. All right. Hey, thank you for showing up. We got Franz coming in from Florida. All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining there, Franz. I appreciate it. We got Christopher. Thank you, coming in from upstate New York, Saratoga. Okay. All right. Thank you for checking in there, Christopher and Franz. Sounds good. Let's continue. All right, let's continue. Let's talk about why self-storage. Now, this is kind of a big one. I'm going to get into this one. All right, this is a big one. Evictions versus auctions. Okay, evictions versus auctions, and that might be evictions versus liens. But Let's talk about what the difference is. In residential real estate, you have evictions, right? You're under eviction laws, and evictions are about people and you having to go through the right process in order to evict somebody from the place that they live in, right? And if you don't do it right, the law is on their side, okay? And so, and a number of different states are much more tenant friendly. A number of different states are much more landlord friendly, right? So it depends on what state you're in, but they can vary drastically, right? California, New York, Oregon, states like this, right? Obviously, very, very tenant friendly. Other states, Arkansas, Texas is known like that, right? That's much more much more landlord friendly, right? And so that being said, when you go through an eviction, okay, when you go through an eviction, let's say you start out the eviction. All right, somebody is late, they're late. So at about 5 days, you send them a late notice. Okay, you're late, you have your late notice. 15 days, you send them another notice. It says, hey, you've been late. You either need to leave, or pay. It's been like a pay or quit notice, right? And then say they don't pay, but they're still living there. Well, now after 30 days, you start to file the eviction. Okay, now 30 days, you start to file the eviction. Probably another 30 days at least, even in the landlord-friendly states, you probably have a total of at least 60 days before you get a judgment and you can move forward with your eviction. You also have to pay for that eviction. Like you usually, unless you do it yourself, but you usually have a lawyer get involved, and that's probably a minimum of $500. All right, so you're basically 2 months without rent. Somebody's still living in your property. You have to pay $500 to a lawyer to evict them, right? Now, if it requires a forced move out, right? So that's where they say, I'm not leaving. Like, even if I got evicted, I'm still staying. Like, I don't have anywhere to go, so I'm going to stay here. Well, now you need a forced eviction. And that means you need to have a sheriff or a constable or a marshal or somebody out there to forcibly move them from your property. In that case, it does probably cost you another $600. So you're out another $600 to do that. Okay, now they're out. All right, now you got your property back. And what has happened to your property? How do you think it's in great condition? Do you think it's like, hey, I can just turn the keys over to somebody else and they can move in right away? What's the likelihood of that happening? Probably very, very, very low, right? Most likely, if you've evicted them, they're probably not taking care of the property. They probably don't care too much about the way that they're leaving it, right? So there might be a bunch of junk that you need to get rid of. There might be a bunch of damage that you need to address. But let's just say the minimum. Okay, let's just say the minimum. The minimum you will probably have to do is you probably have to paint it, right? Because you probably got to paint it units. So you paint them every time you turn a unit. And you got to clean it, right? You got to send in cleaners. And let's just say for a minimum, that's $600, right? $600 to paint and clean it. And we're not talking about if there's a toilet broken or the maintenance on the tub needs to be reglazed and window is smashed and the blinds and the all kinds of different stuff that could make that number go way up, right? I mean, if you got to replace the fridge or the stove or the water heater, or HVAC system, you're into the thousands of dollars, all right? And so we're just going to say the minimum, you got to paint and you got to clean it. That's $600, okay? Now you're about a week or two out, as well as doing that painting and cleaning with your maintenance team or whoever you hire, okay? And then you can get somebody to move in and hopefully get start collecting rent again. But again, you've had 2 months of bad debt, which you're probably not going to recover. Yeah, you can send it to collections and do all the stuff, but the chances of you actually collecting on that is very, very low. So you basically have 2 months of bad debt. And this is at a minimum, right? I mean, this is a landlord-friendly state. If you go into some other states like California, I think the minimum eviction time is 111 days. I think it's 111. So that's almost 4 months. All right, 4 months of not getting your rent. And so that number can jump up really quickly. All right, so now let's compare that, that arduous process that nobody wants to go through to what happens if somebody stops paying for your storage unit. Okay, So somebody stops paying. All right. They need to pay. They haven't paid. They get a late notice on day 5, right? So they have a 5-day grace period. Day 5, okay, they are late. What happens on day 5? Well, what happens is they get locked out. And by locked out, what do I mean? I mean, we actually go and put a lock on their unit. It's called an overlock. Basically, it's a lock that we have the combination for that they don't have the combination for. And it's an overlock on their door. Now they can't get in their unit. So even if they wanted to get in their unit and get their stuff out and then leave, they cannot until they pay. We also lock them out at the gate. So the gate code doesn't work anymore. So if they pull up and they punch in their gate code, they're going to get an error. And they're going to say, well, what's happening here? I need to call in because I need to get into my unit. So they'll call in and the customer service will say, hi, you have to pay your bill and your credit card got denied. So if you'd like to get in the unit, we can send you a gate code, but you need to pay for this. You need to pay right now. Right. So that's a little bit different than multifamily. Well, it's a lot different than, say, residential. Residential, you can't lock your tenant out. You can't say day 6, I'm going to go put a lock on the door and not let them in anymore. That's totally illegal. So you would face a lot of issues for doing that, right? But in self-storage, you can. Self-storage, you basically lock them out. Once they're late. Now, you lock them out. They decide not to pay. You go through, again, let's say 60 days. It varies by state, but let's say it's 60 days. You go 60 days, and then you go through the lien process and auction process, right? So many of you have seen Storage Wars or those kind of shows on, I don't know, on Bravo or Nat Geo or whatever they're on. And basically there's an auction there. There's an auction, and nowadays it's all online. Well, it's not all online, but I would say that most of them are done online nowadays. And so people just go and they bid on the stuff that's in there, right? And say that unit sells. Say it sells for $250, right? So by unit, I mean everything in there. So there's dresser, there's tires, there's bikes, there's lamps, whatever. It sells for $250. Okay. Now, that $250, where does it go? That's a question. Where does that $250 for the auction go? Well, it goes to you. Well, I mean, or the owner, right? So it goes to the ownership group. So we get paid first. So we get our late fees, we get our rent, we get all the other fees, cleaning fees, auction fees, whatever else that was in there. Whatever we were owed, we get first. If there's anything left over, the former renter, the former tenant, they get anything extra, right? Now, there's a lot of times where that unit might sell for like $30, right? Or might even sell for $0. It might sell for $10 or something, because nobody wants anything that's in there. Well, so you don't make your money back. Yes, there's bad debt, and yes, you will not be able to collect that money. However, you still got the unit back pretty quickly, and you'll be able to clean that unit and lock the door and put a new lock on it and rent that unit out relatively quickly, right? Whereas in multifamily, you still, again, got to go through that paint and clean process, and it still costs money for your turn. So that is kind of the big thing about the big differences between auctions and evictions and auctions or lien sales. Again, in the beginning, I should have probably mentioned that an eviction has to do with people and where they're living and the laws that guide a relationship between a landlord and a tenant. The lien laws are what guide the relationship between somebody's stuff and the owner of the property. In general, I would say most people in America do not feel that they have the right to take a bunch of stuff and put it on somebody else's property and not pay for it. And they should be allowed to do that. Most people don't feel like that. Most people feel like if I put a bunch of my stuff on somebody else's property, they're probably going to get rid of it or throw it out or make me pay for it. And that seems like a very understandable point of view. So that's in general, lien laws are much more favorable than eviction laws towards the owners. And that's one of the big advantages of being in self-storage, right? Is that, that you guys know who've done an eviction before, you know how painful that is. And you just don't really have that in self-storage. Okay. All right. That was a long one. But that one was one I wanted to get through. Let's go ahead and let's go into the next one. All right. How about this? This is somewhat of a questionable thing when when a lot of people think about it, right? When you come from a multifamily background or residential background, or even like other commercial background, like retail or office space, well, you're thinking, one of your greatest assets is having this long-term lease. Well, long-term, whether it's a year or 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, whatever, you have this long lease that people are going to continue to pay, and you know that the payment is going to be coming to you, or you're going to evict them. Well, in storage, you have month-to-month leases. Now, month-to-month, you're like, wow, month-to-month. I mean, people just get up and leave and go, only rent for like a month and then leave. It's like, yes, there are people that do that, right? There are people that rent just for very briefly and then leave. Maybe they rent for the summer. There's a lot of students that rent for the summer and then they leave. And there's other people who just, need something for temporary, and they put it in there, and then they need it back later, and then they take it out within a month or two. But the vast majority, the average person, I don't know, stays in a self-storage facility. I think it's something like 14 months. But each facility obviously is going to be different. But there are plenty of people that maybe you even know, or maybe you yourself, that you've rented a unit and then you realize that like months go by or years go by, and you like have this unit that you've been paying for. It's kind of billed on your auto pay on your credit card. It's a 10 by 10 unit, so it costs like $100 a month. And you store your stuff there, and you just think like, okay, they just raised the rent $10, which is a 10% increase, which is a lot. So now it's $110. Do I really want to go down to my facility and move that stuff? Like, I mean, that's an all-day thing. I mean, I would rather be doing anything than moving a bunch of couches and cabinets and paper and boxes and clothes. And then where am I going to move it to? And is it going to be any cheaper? I mean, even if it's $10 cheaper, is it really worth it? I mean, most people in America just feel like, nah, I'll just keep it there, right? It's not enough of a push to get people to move their stuff. So a lot of people, yes, they have the option to leave within, it's month-to-month lease. They don't have to stay there long-term at all. But by kind of like the American nature, I mean, I can't speak to every other country, but the nature of America is just kind of take your stuff and put it in a place and keep it. And even if you don't use it for a couple of years, you just don't feel like getting rid of it, right? You just feel like you're going to use it some other time. So having these month-to-month leases is actually beneficial to self-storage investors, because we're able to increase our rates at any time, right? So if the facility is way below market, you can increase your rates, more often than a year. So say anywhere from 9 months to 11 months, you can raise your rent. If you're in lease up mode, you can even rent it. You can do that even sooner. Right? You can raise your rents anytime. And because the rental rate is being increased, maybe, like I said, just $10 here and there, it's a lot of times it's not enough of a push to get people to move, right? So it's actually an advantage to have this month-to-month lease in the self-storage industry. Okay. All right. Let me see. I think I was going to do another one, which was depreciation, but I think I already covered that in the tax benefits. So that is it for the topics of why to invest in self-storage. Happy to take any questions. Hey, look, showed up. Here's my auntie. Good points. Thank you, auntie. Thanks for joining as well. All right. So I'm going to move this into some Q&A. So Q&A. So if you have any Q&A, I'd love for you to post it in there. Questions about self-storage. Could be about just why to invest in self-storage, or it could be more about operations or about anything else that you'd like to talk about. I do have one question that came in earlier, and I did want to answer that question. And we'll go from there. Okay, so this question is, for security, does the door have an alarm? Okay, that's that was a question that was asked last week, and I just wasn't able to answer it. So let's talk about security and does the door have an alarm? So let's first talk about the front gate. The front gate doesn't necessarily have an alarm on it, but it is monitored, right? You have to punch in a code. And generally those codes are specific to you, right? So it's not just a general code. It's not just the, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4 pound, and it just lets you in, lets everybody in. No, it's like, you know, whatever code it is, but it's specific to you. So that way we as an owner know when you are in the facility, right? And that way we know who's trying to get in and who's in the facility. Okay. Second of all, let's talk about the doors to the actual unit, right? So you're asking, does the actual door, the roll-up door, does that thing have an alarm? That answer is no. Well, okay. That answer in general is no. All right. So for the most part, the answer, no, they're not monitored. No, they're not. Do not have an alarm or something like that on them. Now, I will say, when I say most of them, if you go to, I would say, some of the higher end facilities, and we have one of them that we do this at. So we have a newer building. It was built in renovated 2019, Class A, climate controlled, 5 stories. So these type of facilities, not everyone, but you know, at ours we have a certain service there where we put a little monitoring device in there, and it's really not a monitoring device for us. It's actually a monitoring device for our tenants. So what it does is it monitors things like temperature and motion. I think the temperature, motion, it does a couple other things, but those generally tend to be the most important. So what that does is that kind of lets you know, like, around what temperature is your unit, and then if anybody comes into your unit, what is the temperature, like the change in temperature, right? So that they'll recognize that, hey, this is like body temperature coming in, or was it just that it was like, the door opened and like hot air came in, right? So there's a difference in, they can recognize these types of things. And it can also recognize motion, right? So say like your door opens, or, you know, things, people are walking by, things like that. It monitors those type of activity. And this type of service we have, it will also send a message to that person. So I'll take it, for example, if you are a renter and you subscribe to the service, all right, you subscribe to the service, it sends you a text message anytime something needs to alert you. So say there's some motion, like your door opens, right? It'll send you a text message and it'll say, hi, is your door to your storage facility has been opened. Is this you? And then if you say, yes, it's me, well, then it ends right there. If you say no, well, then it goes on and goes to other people that may be like on your account to see if anybody else is there. And if it just says no, then we'll start to like let you know that, hey, your door opened for some reason. You might want to go down there and check it out because you know there's an alert on it. It'll also it can recognize, like, it's kind of smart too, in that it will know that it'll like check your body temperature as well. It'll check for things like body temperature as well as the motion. So say if you have a unit and you have like a bunch of boxes all over the place, well, at some point maybe the building shakes a little bit, a train goes by, and one of the boxes falls. It goes boom. Well, it won't set off an alarm to you to let you know that, because it checks for like body temperature as well to see, like, hey, it's actually moving. There's motion and there's a body temperature change. Well, if it's just motion because something fell down, you don't really need an alert for that. So it doesn't send you an alert. Or I guess maybe it can if you wanted it to, but for right now, it just doesn't. So hopefully that answered your question. Long-winded way. I don't know. Maybe that was a 10-minute way of discussing, like, for security, does your door have an alarm? All right. So most part, no, it can if you have certain types of services. All right. Okay, all right. I think we got another question here from Christopher. Thank you. Let's see. The storage facility down the street from me has someone on site all the time, 8 to 4 p.m. Okay, seems a little excessive, but is that something that is necessary? Good question. Good question. So you're talking about your operations and how to staff a facility, right? This is very subjective to answer to you, Chris. So some facilities, it may be important to have somebody there all the time, or 8 to 4 p.m. But at other facilities, it's not. And really, that's more of like an owner's decision, right? And I will tell you this, that the industry is moving towards not having people there. With COVID, there was a lot of contactless. There's a lot of things that, like, hey, we can do this all virtually. We don't really need a person there. There's cameras and a lot of other things that we have to monitor the facility. We don't really need a person there. But in the traditional sense, the traditional way to go about it is to have somebody there on site. The movement is moving towards not having somebody on site. Okay, so it seems a little excessive. Could be, yeah. I mean, staff wise, you got to pay for those people to be there, and maybe they're talking to 4 or 5 different people in the whole day, right? And so, is that something that's necessary? Do you need the staff for that? A lot of people would say no. I mean, if you ask me in my case, no. The answer is no. So, good question though, Christopher. Thank you for asking. All right, we got another question here. Oops, Facebook user. Okay, I love that you come on here and give some wisdom. Hey, appreciate it. Thank you so much. I would love also if you have a question, Mr. and Mrs. Facebook user, or if you have a suggestion of what you want to hear about, please also put that on there, because I love to try to talk to you about whatever topic that you want to talk about. All right. Okay. And my aunties, thank you so much for asking. It's a good question. She was commenting on Christopher, your question. So that is a great question. And yeah, just to expand upon, like our operations, the way that we operate, we do not have anybody in the office, right? And so we try to take advantage of technology and things that are available for a person, so that we do not need to staff anybody there from, say, 8 to 4 p.m. every day. Okay. All right. Very cool. So, hey, that seems like the end of our questions, unless anybody has them. But I definitely appreciate you guys joining me. Last, just quick announcements that we have. If you are interested in working with us, partnering with us, and joining us on any of our self-storage deals, we do have a self-storage fund. It's for accredited investors only, but you can invest through our fund, which invests through our self-storage into our self-storage deals, both. And the minimum is like $25,000 in terms of, like, people usually ask, what's the minimum to invest in your fund? It's $25,000. But you do have to be an accredited investor. All right. And that's, I would say, like, that's it for tonight. I would love it if you would give me a thumbs up or a like. I'm trying to do this a little bit more often. I did it last week. I did it this week. I've did it kind of periodically. But I'd love for you to reach out to me on social media. I try to post a lot of things in the social media. And if you do have any topics that you would like to discuss, definitely write them down. Let me know what they are, because I'd love to have more of a conversation than just me talking about things that maybe I think people want to hear, but I don't know if everybody else wants to hear about them. Okay. And if you'll go ahead and fill out that Google form if you're interested in joining or just hearing about my next deals. You want to hear, like, what deal do we have coming up? We have a deal right now. And we have another deal, I think, coming up pretty soon. If you want to hear about those types of things, definitely fill out that partner questionnaire form, and you'll be able to see some detailed information about the deals. Okay. All right, everybody. Talk to you later. Thanks.